Hello, everyone, and welcome to our JBF Industry Support webinar, Reducing Food Waste with ReFED. We're really excited to be here talking about an important topic today, which is food waste. It was an important topic prior to COVID, and it's still a really vital topic that I think a lot of chefs are thinking about in their kitchens. And we have some experts here who are going to share a little bit about their perspectives on that with us. So our panels today are Chef Jennifer Hill-Booker and Dana Gunders from ReFED. But before we get too far into our panel conversation, I'm going to go ahead and review some of the technical aspects of this webinar. If you've joined us before, this will all be very familiar information. So first things first, this webinar is being recorded. So if you have to leave for any reason, or if you want to share it afterwards, share a link, you are more than welcome to do so. It'll be available by next week at the latest at openforgood.com. You'll be able to find this webinar as well as all of our past webinars for your perusal. So we'll field questions as time allows. We generally save these for the last 10 to 15 minutes or so, but you are welcome to submit your questions at any point during the webinar. If you look at your screen, you'll see a little message box with a question mark in it. That's how you're able to type in those questions, and we'll take those at any time. But like I said, we'll probably try to get to most of those questions at the end of the webinar. Finally, if you're having any technical difficulties, if the audio isn't working, whatever it might be, just send us a chat. We will do our best to help you troubleshoot it. We're not the go-to webinar folks, but we've been doing this for about a year now, which is crazy to think. So we've learned a few tricks of the trade along the way. Usually logging off and logging back on helps, but like I said, if you're running into any technical issues, let us know and we will do our best to troubleshoot. My colleagues Cecilia and Debbie are both on providing some really great support right now. So I'm going to introduce briefly our panel before we get right into it. As I said, we're joined by Chef Jennifer Hill-Booker and Dana Gunders from ReFED. I'm Ashley Kosiak. I'm an Impact Program Manager here at the James Beard Foundation. Delighted to be here with you. So, I think we should dive right in. And I'll do my best to direct my questions as well as questions that come from the audience to each of you. But you both have a lot of experience working in the topic of food waste. Dana, obviously ReFED, that's one of your, big focus areas. Chef Jen, you are our sustainability fellow, so like you know so much about it. So Dana, food waste is something we may not think about a lot. Chefs probably think about it more than a lot of consumers, but it's often not top of mind for people. But it has really important environmental implications. To just start off with us, could you share with us, what ReFED is, who ReFED is, and what the work you're doing around food waste is?
Sure, happy to, and thanks to everyone for tuning in, taking your time to be on a screen yet again to listen to this conversation. So ReFED is a national nonprofit across the U.S., and we focus entirely on reducing food loss and waste within the U.S. And we really try to focus on data-driven solutions. And so we do that in 3 ways. We provide data and insights on the topic. We also try to mobilize more capital into the space, both private investment and philanthropic, and generate innovation for that investment to go into. And then lastly, we try to act as just a hub and connector in the space. And there's so many different types of people interested and different areas that this issue touches. And so we really try to make sure that A is talking to B and to provide, opportunities for collaboration and convening and discussion. So that's who we are. And just a little background on the issue overall. I mean, I'll give you numbers in a second, but if you just stop and think about it, we invest so much, so many resources, so many people's time, so much money in growing food, picking it, cooling it, transporting it, cooking it, serving it, and actually getting it to our tables. And when we throw food out, all of that goes to waste, right? And so, there's nobody who wakes up in the morning and says, oh, I think we should waste food today, right? But it is happening, and it's happening in little bits across the entire supply chain, often not really, quite invisibly. And the environmental impacts of that are enormous. ReFED just came out with a recent analysis. We looked very closely and kind of did a whole new take on greenhouse gas emissions from food waste, and they add up to be about 4% of the entire US greenhouse gas footprint. Now, 4% may not sound like a very big number, but it equates to the greenhouse gas emissions from 58 million cars, to give you a sense of just the size. An organization called Project Drawdown that worked to rank solutions to climate overall looked at 76 solutions and ranked reducing food waste as the #1 solution to climate change, above solar power, electric vehicles, and many other solutions we often think of. So from a climate perspective, it's a huge deal. And that's just greenhouse gases, right? When you think about the water, about 1/5 of the country's water goes into producing foods that we don't eat. Not to mention fertilizers, soil health, land use, pesticides, and all of that is for naught when we don't use the food. So huge environmental impacts. Also, what we saw more than anything during this pandemic was that it is happening, just kind of the craziness of it happening alongside food insecurity. And with the pandemic, so many more people becoming food insecure, and yet, those photos of just mountains of zucchini that weren't getting harvested next to mile-long lines of people waiting at food distribution sites. So I think just the social imperative to make sure that when we grow food, it gets eaten, I think has become even stronger over the course of this pandemic.
Thank you. Yeah, I remember those news articles that came out, I think, earlier in the pandemic. It was, the disruption of the supply chain. And I think that was really shocking for a lot of people who don't necessarily understand the supply chain, is that you're seeing this, perfectly good produce being tilled into the ground. Well, the hunger, the need is certainly there. So it's really an important issue. So Jen, you are a professional chef, you're a JBF Sustainability Fellow. What have you seen and experienced in your work with food waste in restaurants and professional kitchens? What have you seen around this topic?
Wow, so I've seen it kind of 2, maybe 3 camps, right? There's the restaurant that is doing everything possible to use every piece and part of their ingredient across, their menu. Then there's the restaurants who are not really on board because they feel that they can't do that and produce, beautiful food. And then there's a third camp where they really do want to reduce their food waste. They want to reduce their food footprint, but they're not sure how to do it. And so I know my work through JBF has allowed me to go and kind of give some practical ways of doing that. And then some numbers that we all understand because they equate to money, right? We know as restaurateurs, as chefs, there's a very slim margin of profit or revenue made in a restaurant. So if I say, hey, for every $1 you spend, 40 cents of that you're putting in the trash. So if you're saying your food cost is 36%, you're putting another 40 cents, right? 40% in the garbage, then what are you left with? And that amount you have to pay your employees, and you have to pay your rent, and you have to buy your ingredients, et cetera, et cetera. So if you put it like money, that clicks first. And then you can talk about the environment and, reducing food waste because it's good for the environment. It's good for the climate. And people get it that way.
Thank you. And I think we're going to come back to some of that, in my future questions. I have a lot of questions about, business models and all that important stuff for restaurants. But kind of before we get into how the restaurants are situated in, in this food waste solution, Dana, I'd like to go back to you. Like, what does the food waste pipeline look like in the US? We talked a little bit about farms and a little bit about restaurants, but where are we seeing the most food waste? Like farming, point of sale, household, where is that? And, you've already touched on this, but if you want to share a little bit more on the environmental implications of food waste, you talked about climate. That's such a huge issue right now, and we know it's an imperative in the current administration?
Yeah. So when you look across the supply chain, the biggest contributor to food going to waste is actually households. It's like 329 million of us all, cleaning out our fridge and scraping our plates. But and second after that, in terms of tons, are farms, and then comes food service, actually. So a lot of produce being left behind on farms. But that's not to say food service is small. I mean, it's right up there. And when you look at it from a value perspective rather than tons, food service actually is right after residential. It's right there next to residential and sort of the top. So from a dollar perspective, food service, the value of what's being thrown out is actually quite high there. And the impacts, again, I mean, they're enormous. One of the things we looked at when we looked at the greenhouse gas factors was, well, what is the difference between throwing a tomato out or never even harvesting a tomato, let's say, and throwing one out in a restaurant? And it turns out that a tomato or a pound of produce that is thrown out at the restaurant has 6 times the greenhouse gas footprint of a product that is never harvested on the farm. And so while from a tonnage perspective, farms offer a lot of opportunity to save more produce, to get it to people, we're not growing that food just to till it under. What you care about are environmental issues, especially from a climate and energy perspective, actually, it's really critical that we start working on this in restaurants and food service, as well as in households.
Great, thank you. And I know that you have some data illustrated in slides, so whenever you want to get to those, you just call it out, and we'll pull those up, because there's a lot of really good and interesting data there. And again, I wanted to remind folks who are listening in the audience, if you do have any questions, definitely feel free to add those at any point in time, and we'll try our best to get to those. But now I'm going to go back to Jen. So Dana talked a little bit about the financials, about the value there. What is the impact of food waste for a business? You're running a professional kitchen, a restaurant, whatever it might be, catering, food service. Why is it important for professional kitchens to reduce their food waste?
Sure, as I mentioned, kind of in the intro, it comes down to not just making a ton of money, but surviving, right? Your business being viable, because there's such a slim margin of revenue that's made in a restaurant. So if you're throwing away your revenue, your profits, then your business will fold. So you have to look at it, if you're looking truly just dollars and cents, if you're able to find an ingredient that you can use across all of your menu items, or as many as possible, then obviously your food waste is much less. So if you do that with your produce, if you do that with kind of your bigger proteins, if you do that by having a limited menu, then you can control your food waste a lot more. And I know, speaking as a chef and a chef instructor, when I taught Gourmet, which is kind of the cold side of the kitchen, or your terrines, or your sandwiches, your sushi, all of those things, we use every little teeny bit until there's like nothing left, because we understand that that's where you're going to make your money. You may not make it on the bigger steaks or things like that, because there's not much room to trim or use it across different menu items. But when you get into your produce and your fruits, when you create your menu, like, how can I use that item? And that equates to less food waste, which equates to hopefully more money in your pocket.
And that feels like it's always important, as you talked about at the very top. The margins, the profit margins in restaurants are so slim, and we know that it's even more difficult now with the pandemic. So let's talk about, Dana. Let's talk about your roadmap for 2030. And that is, the goal is to help the food system cut food waste by about 50% in the next 10 years. I guess it'd be 9 years now. How can this be done?
Yeah, with a lot of work. Yeah, the US has a goal to cut, not just the US, there's international goals. The UN has set goals, many countries have signed on. The US has adopted a goal to try to cut food loss and waste in half by 50% by 2030. This is enormous. In fact, what we found in our recent analysis is that since 2010, and the baseline year for that goal is 2010, since 2010, food waste has not decreased, it's actually increased by approximately 12%. But that's the bad news. The good news is that it increased up until 2016 and it's actually leveled off since 2016. So we are seeing more work on this issue. When you look at it per capita, because population was growing over that time, it actually started to go down. And I think the work on this topic is starting to be reflected in those numbers. Our roadmap analyzed 42 different solutions to food waste, and we analyzed it for how much food could be saved and how much the solutions would cost to implement and how much they would save in dollars. And we added that all up and we said, what would happen if everyone did these 42 things, everyone, that it would apply to? And we found that indeed we could achieve a little bit over 50% reduction in food waste by doing that. But it will take a huge acceleration in efforts from where we are today. The good news was that it had a 5-to-1 return on investment. We did a whole financial analysis. And there is, a great story that if those 42 solutions were implemented, it would result in $73 billion in revenue and savings. But it would cost $14 billion across the country to get there. So there is a lot of investment needed. A lot of that investment is needed from the people implementing the solutions, so from the companies or organizations where the food is being purchased and cooked. That's where we need these solutions to be implemented, and that's where we need some of the investment to happen as well. Just to give you a sense of numbers, so we estimate that in food service alone, now that's all of food service, including institutional food service, full service restaurants, limited service restaurants, healthcare, et cetera, about $164 billion of food goes to waste every single year. When you look at that, and maybe this is a good time to kind of jump into that slide that I sent you, Ashley. When you look at kind of why that's happening, one of the things we did in our analysis is look at what is driving that? What is that? And here you can see a screenshot from our new tool where the vast majority of food that is going to waste in restaurants is actually happening in front of house. It's plate waste. It's everything that is getting served but not eaten. And after that comes overproduction, so just making too much of things. And then from there, you get into issues like, being worried about date labels passing, trimmings, things spoiling, any kind of cooking or handling issues, etc. So, I think the plate waste issue is a really great opportunity. Go to the next slide. I can show you some of the solutions. So here are from a financial perspective, the top 10 solutions for food service to consider that we were able to analyze. Now, Jen mentioned a bunch of really important practices in the kitchen that we think are equally as important. We just weren't able to sort of have the evidence and do the math around something like smaller menus, good menu design that repurposes different ingredients across the menu, or things like that. But we think those are equally critical. From what we were able to analyze, as you can see, taking another look at portion sizes was one of the biggest opportunities around this. I know that is a very delicate topic to talk about because of the competitive landscape. So I would love to hear, Jen, your thoughts on just kind of, when we looked at portion sizes, we felt like it's not about just shrinking your Big Mac or whatever it is, right? Your double, triple, quarter pounder. It's about giving options, right? It's about having that big option, but also having a second option for somebody who's not as hungry.
Right.
And that maybe there was a case that where you could even charge a little bit more for you know, if it's half the food, you could charge 2/3 the price. And that was kind of the assumption we went in with. But Jen, I'm curious kind of what you've seen and what, if you think that's an opportunity or if it's just a hot rod not to touch.
No, I think, no, that makes perfect sense. And the fact that a lot of, or the majority of food waste in commercial kitchens happens in front of the house because people are being overserved. And, you know, for someone like me that's, you know, very frugal, and I think a leftover is my best friend because I don't have to cook the next day, there's equally, if not more people who won't touch a leftover, right? And I have friends like that, which that's another conversation. But so then you look, okay, if we're giving people too much food and either they leave it uneaten and the establishment puts it in the trash, or, you know, they're doing their part and they pack it up to go to take home to then in 3 days put it in the trash, it's still food wasted. And then there's packaging involved, so that's another, you know, part of waste and landfill. So then I thought about, well, what if we had kind of 2 menu options? And not to make people who want the full shebang of what they're paying for have it, but perhaps say you have your regular menu sizes and then maybe you offer something that's a smaller accompaniment to that, right? So that you can say, I know that I want dinner tonight and I'm going to take the rest for lunch, you know, leftover lunch tomorrow. And so I'm going to pay the $10 for the full portion. And then maybe, you know, you're never going to eat a leftover. So maybe you pay the $8 for a smaller portion. But just kind of a way to give the consumer that option to reduce food waste at point of sale. And also a way to kind of educate our consumer that you don't have to eat all we give you. You don't have to take it home and then throw it away later or feel bad about leaving it. So I think that's a good approach. Also, if you try to find kind of that silver lining of the pandemic, it is the consumer, knowing that these big, you know, binders of menu offerings are maybe a thing of the past. So most restaurants are offering a very reduced menu. And so that helps reduce food waste, definitely in the back of the kitchen and perhaps in the front of the kitchen as well, because there's, you know, limited ingredients to use. And then if I'm offering you the option of a smaller portion, then we're reducing food waste there as well.
Yeah, I love
Now,
that.
it's great. And I'd love to see her, because I know we have another question about other restaurant solutions. I've also heard, you know, some chefs, if like there are certain menu items you order, they'll send along like a little, if it's to go, like a little slip or something that's like how to reuse this and, you know, how to reheat. I love leftovers.
Yeah.
So
I love that. Actually,
I
I think
definitely know the folks who are.
Sorry, I
Go
was just
ahead.
going to say, I think one of the fun challenges of leftovers, and I've heard this a lot from chefs, is not reusing it, not just like reheating it, but almost like
Mhm.
I take my, you know, my leftover whatever fried rice and I make like a soup out of it, or you know, so like these really creative new meals that you can like reinvent your leftovers into something else. It's kind of a cool idea to think of like, well, if you sell a big portion of something, could you pack that leftover up with an idea of like how somebody could cook it into something else the next day? It's kind of cool.
Yeah, I have a good girlfriend of mine that she puts an egg on everything. So her solution is a fried egg on whatever was left over makes it better. So maybe that can be it. Just add a fried egg to it.
I love
I
it.
love it. And I'm a big fan of anyway, we're going down that rabbit hole. I feel like it's
Okay.
an issue that's really important. Like I feel like every Thanksgiving there's a whole bunch of articles in all the food media about how to reuse those Thanksgiving leftovers. And I just feel like how do we carry that creativity and inspiration through the rest of the year? But
Yeah.
that's a question maybe for another day.
Maybe. I mean, I think, you know, as I said, households are actually the #1 contributor, right, to food waste. And I think that restaurants play such a key role in shaping people's like opinion and especially creativity around food, and especially local restaurants that people really know and come to love and trust, like their favorite. So I don't know, I think there's a closer connection there than maybe it seems. One other thing, if I may actually say about what's on the slide here, if I kind of go down the list here around waste tracking. So one of my favorite statistics around food waste, now this is around households, is that 75% of Americans say they waste less than the average American.
Mhm.
I'll just let you stop and think about that. Now, I have heard anecdotally that the same is true, if not even a higher number, for restaurant kitchens. Any restaurant kitchen you walk into will tell you that they do not waste food. And that's where I think waste tracking comes in as a real opportunity, because it's really hard to manage something that you don't think is there and that you don't know, that you're not measuring. So where waste tracking has been used, it shows great results. I mean, like 30 to 40% reduction of waste in kitchens. It's primarily been used in institutional kitchens to date. I think there's been some attempts at like more custom, like for like a full service restaurant. But even if you're not using like a high tech approach to it, are you taking a look? Are you doing that old French chef, trick of dumping the garbage on the thing and making everyone look at what's there, and just really making sure that you're kind of in tune with tracking waste, and not just in your kitchens, but again, like in the front of house? Are you somehow taking notice of what is getting scraped off of plates every single day, every single time, so that you can learn from that? I knew one guy who ran a breakfast shop in the Bay Area, and he noticed that there were a lot of potatoes coming back on the platters, all of his omelets with the potatoes. And what he did was he chose to reduce the serving of potatoes. He actually printed it on his menu and said, hey, we are going to serve a smaller portion of potatoes because we're noticing a lot are going to waste. And if you'd like, we'll provide free refills, right? And he did that, and it resulted in a great reduction in waste. And so I think getting creative around that, but you can only do that if you notice it. And then that third one being Markdown alert applications. This is kind of a new thing that's just coming to the US. It's been really successful, kind of sweeping across Europe. And that are these last minute, these apps that allow you to sell product at the last minute at a deep discount. So end of night, 11 p.m. Oh, I still have, 4 servings of lasagna, and you can kind of post it on there and sell it. And they've, like I said, been having great success kind of all around, reducing losses for restaurants and saving food at the same time.
This is great. I have so many questions, so many follow-up questions. So my first is, so you talked about like the old school French chef way of, dumping out, monitoring the plates. I would go for bottomless potatoes. I would eat all the potatoes. Like, what other methods of waste tracking have you heard used? Like, whether technology or just like old school, using your eyes?
Sure, I know for a fact that restaurants will have someone, usually it's the exec chef, maybe the sous chef, that literally watches all of the plates come back from the dining room to see what's been eaten, what's not been eaten. And part of it is to say, okay, well, this doesn't sell, we'll take it off the menu, or perhaps we didn't really hit it tonight on that particular dish. But it's also to see how much is going in the trash. Do we really need that traditional lemon crown with the salmon, right? Or is that just going directly into the garbage? So it's being aware of what you're ordering, what's being served, what's maybe being in the trash that you're not aware of. And Dana mentioned it, and I've done this before, is like, let's look through the trash. Let's see what goodies are in here. And it's also seeing what your customers are telling you they don't want or they don't value as a part of their meal as it comes back to the kitchen. So it's not, technology is not going to be a computer app, but it'll just have to be someone in the establishment being engaged to get kind of that feedback from your guests.
Yeah, I would echo that. And I think, I've seen it happen in, like buckets or just different like visual volume ways, I think are pretty effective. And then the only other piece is just making sure you understand kind of why, like what are the main reasons? Is sometimes it's just visually obvious, like those are a lot of broccoli stalks. We're throwing away, 8 pounds of
Yeah.
broccoli stalks every single day. Maybe we should start selling like a broccoli stalk salad or something, right? And others, it's kind of like, well, I don't know, was it like Jen said, did you not hit it that night, or what's the deal? So, yeah, I think it winds up being pretty custom pretty quickly, but just sort of taking that mindset and trying to do it on at least a semi-regular basis, right? It's great to do once, you'll learn a lot. It's even better to do for a week straight, you'll learn even more. And then it's good to do for a week straight every 2 months, because you got to keep yourselves honest and things change.
Right.
So, this is something that I've heard in other conversations about food waste, and I wanted to get your take on it. It sounds like one of the best interventions for food waste is to stop it before it is even prepared, before it even gets to the, to the plate and to the consumer. I know that, several years ago, and I don't know if this is still a hot topic, there was a lot of conversation about like donating prepared foods. Obviously nothing that's been on someone's plate, but say you're a caterer, you prepared a bunch of dishes that, the order got canceled or what have you, prepared meals that have not been touched by a diner. What are the solutions, whether it's that sort of solution or composting? What are kind of the other solutions that people are worried about that might have, I don't want to call them legal implications, but composting can be hard. People are constantly worried, oh, even though no one touched this food, I can't donate it because X, Y, and Z. What information or knowledge can you share about those issues?
Sure. I know that's an issue here in Georgia as far as prepared foods, if you can donate them to the food bank. But there are organizations that will take prepared foods so long as, it's date labeled, time, has it ever been in the in the oven? Maybe it's just been in the cooler. It's never actually been cooked. So just making sure that those things are labeled and finding an organization that will take that. And maybe it's not a food bank, maybe it's a shelter, or somewhere with children or domestic abuse, victims that need food. So check in your city to find out. Also, I'd like to remind people that composting is still trash. I mean, it's better trash, but it still takes energy to break all of that down in the earth, and it still releases heat and, emissions and all of those things. So you want to stop before you get to that composting. And I think a lot of that is just being prepared and pre-planning, right? So if you're a home cook, do you plan your menu, or do you just go to the big box grocery stores and just buy in bulk and hope you'll be inspired to make something out of it later, right? So I always encourage people to check the sales paper, they're digital, but see what's on sale, because usually that means it's local, which means it's cheaper, it's less energy, getting it shipped to your door. It's probably healthier because it is in season. Restaurants, we do the same thing, like shop locally, get to know, your farmers. So that kind of reduces waste in the sense that you're not flying things in from Chile or from Mexico. So I think that's a way of benefiting and helping as well. What about you, Dana? What do you think?
Oh my goodness, so much there. Well, I think on donation overall, I'll start by saying, in case anyone's not aware, there's a federal law that protects anyone from any kind of liability issues around donating food. So if you are not donating food because you're worried that there may be some kind of liability you're taking on, that somebody who eats it might get sick and you might get in trouble or sued from that, there's it's a very strong law. And actually there is literally no case of anyone ever suing anyone for getting sick from donated food. So that's the good news. I think it's really important, Jen, like you said, to identify the right organization ahead of time. So food banks typically don't take food from restaurants because they're operating at warehouse scale, but they do likely know who in their area will take food. So it's worth the call. If you don't know where to start, it's worth the call to the food bank to figure out like what organizations might take prepared food, and then work with that organization to set up kind of a regular pickup or an on-call pickup or whatever you need. Oftentimes, it helps to have a part of your cooler dedicated to that food that will be donated, because otherwise I hear actually that space constraints can, it might take the organization a day to come get that food. And so just sort of dedicating the space in your cooler is a small logistic that can help. And so yes, on local food systems, Jen, that you were bringing up, I see a lot of like intangible waste benefits. I have never been able to like quantify why local food systems are better from a waste perspective, but I think it's because they involve direct relationships. So if that farmer you're buying from, has some like hail-pocked tomatoes that he wouldn't otherwise be able to sell, but you know him, he might call you up and be like, hey, I'll give you, deep discount on these 3 cases of tomatoes, and you can make sauce and everyone's good. It also travels less, and so it's tends to be fresher and therefore have a longer shelf life for much of the food as well. So I definitely support that. And then on composting, Jen is absolutely right. So composting, in our analysis from a greenhouse gas perspective, compost, not creating food like surplus food or food waste in the first place, is actually 8 times more effective at reducing greenhouse gases than composting. And so, I think composting is a really important thing to do with food there's nothing else that can be done with it, with bones and pits and peels and all of those things. But certainly it's not a justification for kind of having too much food in the first place, environmentally speaking.
Excellent. And Dana, I kind of want to backtrack just a little bit. So earlier you talked about kind of 42 steps, interventions, whatever that might be, to help us to get to that 50% reduction by 2030. Could you share with us, just give us a little like flavor of what some of these interventions are or could be?
Yeah, well, on the screen are 10 of them. So they all kind of look like this, different things that can be done. So you'll see it's as specific as having smaller plates as a restaurant, so that again that kind of gets at that portion thing. You're not serving as much, or if it's a self-serve operation, which aren't around these days, and maybe will not come back, but it encourages people to take less food. So that's one. But yeah, I mean, some of them are practice-based. It's just sort of a change in operations. Others are technology-based. There's all sorts of new technologies coming out around waste tracking and apps and forecasting and things like that. The vast majority are focused on preventing food from going to waste in the first place. A few are improving food donation and really strengthening our food rescue system. And then we do have a bunch around recycling, so not just composting, but also animal feed and anaerobic digestion and things like that. And then we actually, on our roadmap, we have a whole set of information on other practices, like some we've mentioned here today that we weren't able to model, but we still know are good interventions, repurposing ingredients and smaller menus and things like that.
Excellent. So as we kind of we're going to start transitioning into questions from the audience, and I still have some kind of final questions for each of you. So for folks, the Beard Foundation worked with ReFED on this great little, it's like a two-page info thing on incorporating food waste reduction into your COVID-19 operating plan. So it specifically talks about food waste in this, I don't know if it's a new world anymore, we've been here for a year, but in this world we're living in. So if you have access to handouts, if you're watching this webinar on a device where you have access to handouts, it's available as a handout. I am also sending a virtual link. So if you open your chat, you'll also see a virtual link to this PDF where you will be able to download it. So another resource that I want to share is ReFED's Stakeholders, Restaurants, and Food Service, where I think that you'll be able to find a lot of this information that Dana is sharing right now. And I believe you'll also have access to the full insights engine. So if you're like, this is fascinating, you know, this restaurants and food service information is great, I want to check out the rest of the insights engine, see where else there's, you know, room for success and intervention, definitely go check that out and learn more. We had a couple questions come in, and so Dana, I'll ask, you know, they really would love this information to be available, these decks, so your 2 slides to be shared, and confirming we'll do our best to see if we can post those where we post this video, and make that available. But I also know that those should be available in the stakeholders restaurant and food service link I just shared. Is that correct, Dana?
That is correct. Yep. And if you just go to refed.com, you should be able to find it relatively easily as well. What we showed you today is just a tiny snapshot of the amount of information that's available. We have all sorts of ways for you to click around and learn more about the role of food service and the big picture, different solutions that are available. We have a directory that has over 700 organizations that are providing solutions in this space. Some of them are around food donation. So that was one thing I forgot to mention. If you're trying to figure out, you know, how to donate food near you, you can sort of put your location in, and it may pop up something. I'm not sure. It depends on where you are. And also an impact calculator. So many of you on this call are probably already doing a lot of work on this issue, and we have a whole calculator where you can put on, like, hey, I donate, you know, I donate 200 pounds of food a month. Like, I want to say something about that to my customers, and it'll let you go on really easily and just put in 200 pounds of food, and it'll spit out for you the greenhouse gas impacts of that, the water impacts, the meals that come from it. And then and we did that so that you can, you know, claim that, like, you're doing great work, go claim it and tell your customers about it. And so that's there as well. And then also the page you're mentioning, Ashley, is kind of, we've tried to take, there's so much information out there, we've tried to take it and really boil it down specific to restaurants and food service, and what are some of the top things that you should be thinking about. So please go take a visit there.
Excellent. And so they're available in the chat and on the Open for Good page where the recording of this webinar will be posted. We'll try to add as many links, handouts, downloads, all of that fun stuff. We'll try to put it in just all one place. So you'll have access to this recording when it's available, and everything else we're able to make available all in one place to make that easier for everyone to access. So Jen, I'm gonna send this to you first, and then, you know, Dana, I think you'll have some responses as well. We had someone write in about an online, I think it's an online platform called Too Good To Go that connects users with places where they can pick up leftover food. It's in New York State and Boston. I've seen other platforms similar. I think there are similar apps around the country. So basically technologies that are connecting food, and that doesn't even go into, you know, the grocery boxes with, you know, imperfect foods and ugly fruits and vegetables. So, you know, first Jen, you, and then Dana, what are your thoughts on these sort of online platforms? What else have you seen that maybe we didn't just mention? What's your take on that?
Personally, I think it's an excellent idea, especially if you're in a restaurant with a strong community. So your neighborhood restaurants, and you know that there are people there that are hungry, right? Because we know that in America, unfortunately, we have a high hunger rate, especially with our marginalized population, our children. Unfortunately, a lot go to bed hungry, and if they're not in, you know, in-person school, they're in virtual school, they're not even getting that free breakfast or free lunch. So I think that restaurants that are able to say, hey, you know, we have 10 portions of the Blue Plate Special left, you can come pick it up at this time and place, is an excellent idea to give back to the community. I've also heard of restaurants that will take all of their leftovers, raw ingredients, I should say, not leftovers, but raw ingredients that didn't make it on the menu item or was over ordered or whatever the thing happened, and they will purpose that into meals that they give away or donate or offer for a minimal cost. So let's say that they made a beautiful vegetable fried rice, to talk about the rice Dana mentioned earlier. And you can come and just give what you can afford, or if you can't afford anything that week, then you still can take, that dish home as a meal for yourself or for your family. So we don't want to have the waste in the first place, right? But inevitably we'll have some. So then you have to decide as the organization what to do with that. And I always like to say, family or village or community first, and then go further outreaching. So I'm all for it. And you said it's called Too Good to Go?
Yeah.
I think I like it. I'm for it.
Yeah, I mean, when I said that's sweeping across Europe, that is the app that is sweeping across Europe right now. And it's because it's just a win-win, I mean, I think a lot of times restaurants have a little bit extra at the end of the night, not a lot. And so it sort of feels like, well, what are we going to do with this? And they've solved, that's really their like niche, is like, okay, you only have 5 portions of something, great, put them on, get half price from, and so that's, I think, the reason they're so successful is it works for both sides. It works for all sides, right? And I love that Jen, I mean, it is an opportunity for people in your community to, be part of your restaurant, even if they can't afford it normally. So
right.
I have 2 questions that feel like they're kind of connected. They're on the same line, on the same thread. So we're going to kind of combine them. And it's a hard one, so I'm going to toss it to whoever wants it first. Maybe we'll try Dana first, since Jenna, we went to you first last time.
Okay.
What advice would you give for making food waste, reducing food waste more accessible in the home? But also, how do you reach folks who are just like, I don't care, this isn't my thing? How do you wake people up, I guess, to the imperative of this sort of endeavor, especially now when, we're doing a lot of big box stores and, buying a lot in bulk and maybe don't use it all. So Dana, I'll go to you first on that, and Jen, then you.
Okay.
Yeah. So I will answer that by using meal kits as my example, because I think it's really, one thing I'll say about this issue is I've always felt like there's something in it for everyone, and people understand it very quickly, right? So it's not like climate change that you just sit there and like explain science to anyone. Like, people understand like food going to waste is like not a good thing. The problem is it's sort of fallen off their radar, and also they don't know what to change, because once they have it, it's already happened. So the challenge is trying to get people to think upstream, right? To think when they're shopping. Yeah, I always say, like, when you are shopping, that is when you are committing to food. And like what happens after that is sort of up to you to figure out. But shopping is such an important like moment in the whole picture, and people don't tend to think about the food they're going to waste then. In fact, people tend to be very aspirational when they're shopping, and they're going to eat healthy that week and cook something really adventurous and be good citizens. So and yet then the week happens and they don't necessarily follow through with that. One of the really interesting interventions, I think, on our list is meal kits. And the reason that meal kits actually are really high in terms of their potential to save food is that they do a lot of those things we want people to do in their homes. They do it for them, right? They plan the meals, they do the shopping without buying a lot of extra stuff. And in fact, they size the ingredients just to that meal, and so you don't have to buy a whole bunch of cilantro when you only need a few sprigs, etc. And then I think when all of that's done, people don't just go like, I'm just not going to cook that. Like, most people, if you go through the process of getting a meal kit, actually do follow through and cook those meals. So I think, like, but they don't do it because of food waste, right? They do it because it's convenient, or like whatever. They like meal kits for a lot of other reasons, and I think that is really the ticket to the people that don't care about it. Like, you don't have to care about food waste, just care about saving money and plan your meals and follow these 3 steps, and then we'll be in good shape. Or care about it for moral reasons, right? So I think finding the actions we want people to do and why it's worth it for them to do those actions is more important than convincing them to care about food waste.
Yeah, I would say I totally agree with you. And I have a couple friends that they're like, yeah, we don't have kids, we don't care. really, about a lot of social things. Yeah, and they're still my friends, but you know. But I think part of this for the home cook to really get engaged and be excited about reducing food waste is to call it something else. Because the fact that we call it waste, right, in way is negative. People think, well, it's waste, is trash, it's garbage. Shouldn't I throw it away? So perhaps we need to rename it, revamp it, give it a facelift of like running a full use kitchen and make it trendy and sexy, and maybe get a spokesperson to tell you, you know, all the ways you can do this. So, you know, jokes aside, I do really feel that we can make people care by making it important to them. So are they repurposing or refreshing or full using, but something that's very positive and very proactive, so that at the end of the day, right, they feel like they have that gold star because they did everything they could do to, you know, take that apple as far as it could along that food chain before, you know, ended up in the compost.
Excellent. So we had another question come in, and this is, I don't know as much about community fridges. The question is about community fridges, what your thoughts are with those. I feel like this is something relatively new that I'm seeing, but maybe I just haven't been looking in the right place. But, you know, considering COVID and everything else, you know, do you think that community fridges can help reduce food waste as well as, you know, promote food access? This is kind of one that I'm not as familiar with. So Jen, I'm going to go to you first if you have thoughts on that, and then Dana, I'll go to you.
Yeah, actually, I had just started to see maybe in the last month or so the community refrigerators on social media. And then my Les Dames d'Escoffier organization, we just had a program about, really it was about organizing, but then it was talking about what do you do with all your extra pantry items? And of course, this can also speak to fresh produce. And so it was these community refrigerators where you can donate, and the one we looked at was kind of unopened, unused, so it wasn't pre-cooked macaroni or, you know, a lasagna, pan of lasagna, but it was maybe a case of tomatoes or, you know, a case of chicken stock you're never going to use or you over purchased or whatever. I think right now with so many people out of work, right, money being much tighter than it has been, that a community refrigerator is the perfect place for organizations to donate, whether they want the accolades or anonymously, and families to go and be able to pick up food that they need with their home without, you know, any feeling of shame or anyone, you know, getting too much in your business like some of these organizations can do.
Great. Dana?
Yeah, they seem to be working, I guess is what I would say. I was skeptical at first, just from like the food safety perspective, that people could figure it out, but it seems to be working. So absolutely, I think it's like that super organic, you know, nature of just people just sharing, right? There's also apps. There's an app called Olio that, again, kind of started in Europe, came to the US, and it's about community food sharing in general. So without the physical fridge, it's more of a an app-based way to say, hey, I have half a pizza left, anyone want it, kind of thing in your neighborhood. And similarly, right, it's just kind of like, you have this food, you want to do something with it, like figure out what that is. And I think it's everything we're talking about is kind of on that continuum of what do you do when you have extra food around at the end of the night, or in your household or whatever it is. And I think, you know, whether you sell it on Too Good to Go, you give it away, you know, etc. One thing I'll say about sort of the community sharing is that more and more states, and we've actually been trying to get this to be added to the federal liability. Right now, the liability protections only apply if you donate it to a nonprofit organization. You can't just sort of like out your back door. You can, but you're just not protected from a liability standpoint of giving that food away, and you don't get the tax credits, right? So if you want the tax benefits of it, you're better served going through a more formal channel. But a lot of people aren't really worried about that side of it anyways.
Yeah.
All right, in these 4 minutes we have remaining, we're going to ask you each, Dana, then Jen, for any like closing thoughts. You know, we had some really great ideas come in from folks, you know, getting front of house and back of house staff on board, you know, looking for checking out opportunities for food waste intervention. But you know, any final thoughts on what consumers can do? You know, how to get a question came in, how to get local restaurants on board. Any final closing thoughts? How people can get more involved with ReFED? James Beard, we have an online curriculum for culinary schools, but I would certainly direct folks who maybe want to get involved to ReFED, or we could reach out to us. But closing thoughts on all of those topics.
Sure. I would say maybe from a commercial kitchen, maybe challenge restaurants to come up with a weekly blue plate special that incorporates all of the waste or unused items that you normally have in the kitchen. And maybe that's your vegan option or your vegetarian option or your omnivore option. Make it same price or discount it just to kind of move it out of the kitchen. And that way it doesn't go in the trash. And I also want to challenge restaurants and home cooks to do this 30-day challenge I did a couple years ago, where for 30 days you can only shop and use ingredients that are locally grown in like I think it was a 50 or 100-mile radius. And then you get 2 imports, like coffee or wine. But to kind of hammer home what it takes to eat locally, to hammer home that you can reduce, right, your carbon footprint about stuff being shipped in. But I think most importantly, to get to know your neighbors, get to know your community, your family farmers, and all of those people that can help your restaurant and your home be a success and reduce a lot more food waste.
Great. Dana?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say I know what a hard time this is for restaurants, and it's a really hard time to be thinking about doing anything but just like straight up surviving. And at the same time, everyone is being so innovative right now, right? And changing what they're doing anyways. And I think that almost inadvertently, a lot of restaurants are changing things in a way that actually will, in the long term, reduce waste, if not already, in terms of reducing menus and just taking another look at what's selling, what's not, your menu design and how you're staffing things and all of it, right? Portions. I also think that customers are very open-minded right now. Like, there is a lot of goodwill towards restaurants right now, and there's an understanding of needing to be understanding. And so it's a good time to think about, like, what do I need? Like, what kind of social license do I need from my customers to do something in a way that would actually help address this, save me money, make me more salient, you know, et cetera. So I would just say, give it some thought and give your customers maybe a little benefit of the doubt in that sense. I try to communicate with them and trust them, because you might find that they are really open right now. And just lastly, there was a question on how to engage other restaurants. I'll just mention that I know both Nashville and Memphis, and I think a variety of other towns, I think Denver, have all done these restaurant food waste challenges. Where they really try to engage a whole community of restaurants. Often there's like a green restaurant group that hosts it and rolls it out across a community. So yeah, check those out. I believe that there's a template for them on a NRDC Food Matters page. So I don't know, Ashley, if there's a way we can kind of find that and get that out to the group. But there is a template for them, just know that. And that's just one other idea for sort of engaging like groups of restaurants as well. So anyway, thank you all for sticking in and caring about this in such a complicated time.
Those are all great suggestions, and I'm adding the nrdc.org/food/matters to the chat. So if you want to check out the NRDC site, that is in the chat as well. So you'll be able to really see all of these various, you know, we have the platforms, various apps, all of the links. This is a link-heavy conversation, but there's a lot of really good information out there. So, you know, Chef Jennifer, Dana, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. Thanks everyone for attending. We're really excited to have you with us to talk about this topic. go to openforgood.com to check out all of the James Beard Foundation's upcoming webinars. You're going to see Jennifer Hill Booker again very soon. So we're excited to have her back. And like I said, when we post the recording of this webinar, we will do our best to make as many of these links and resources available on that page so that they should be easily available in one spot. But we hope to see you again soon, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much. Great conversation. Take care, everyone.
Bye. Bye, Dana. Bye, Ashley.
Bye.